Every country in the world operating is resources that's been pulled from Africa. Everyone benefits but Africa. So Africa doesn't need to be saved. Africa is the one doing the saving.
Akon, you've said, if I could have my way, Africa would be the United States of Africa with just one leader. Of 100%. Course, Marcus Garvey wrote a poem about this. Bob Marley sung about this. Muammar Gaddafi, the Libyan leader, poured his wealth into this idea of a United States of Africa. But really, is it, when you look at Africa today, a continent of over 1 billion people, over 2,000 different languages, is it realistic?
Well, first of all, I think it has to be our generation and the generation that come after us to achieve it. I don't think this generation would ever be able to achieve it because there's too much history and it's too much built up into where it started today. It has to be set from a generation that's clear from the history, clear from conflict, and see it, the world in the way that we see it. The only way Africa can evolve in that way is that we have to be united. There has to be a united Africa. It has to be one Africa. It can't be so many countries with so many leaders, so many opinions. You know, all those countries, I think, should be broken down into basically states. And there should be one president, and he or she should be democratically elected by all Africans to do what's best for Africa.
But I mean, in just one country already, it's so difficult to have a democratic election. How do you have a democratic election in a so-called United States of Africa? How do you do that?
It's not hard. I mean, listen, if China can do it, and they don't even have a democratic election.
So maybe what? So
you know
maybe what democracy is something that Africa doesn't need.
Africa,
maybe it has to be another form of rule.
There has to be elections. If you want to keep Africa stable, there has to be elections. All we need is Africans to be able to govern themselves. What's stopping Africa from governing themselves now and creating that one Africa is that there's still foreigners in certain areas that still control Africa. You know, prime example,
the former colonial powers,
Francophone countries. If the French just get out the way, we can really be okay. But a lot of the wars is set up from influences.
Are you interested in getting into politics one day?
Absolutely not. Hell no.
Why is that? I mean, you have all these great ideas, but
listen,
not interested.
I would prefer to be the guy standing next to the president. I would never want to be a president.
Akon, you...
The same thing we can do in Kenya. We need a borderless continent. We need a continent with one currency. We need a continent with one parliament, which has got teeth and it will bite and hold the executives in countries accountable. And ultimately, we need one African president. We need United States of Africa. We supported and we continue to support those ideals of brother leader Gaddafi. We are following in the footsteps of those leaders. We are not saying they were perfect, some of them, but there are a lot of teachings that come from our leaders in the continent which we can follow because we think they will unite us. This thing was the one thing called Africa. This was one thing. It was divided by colonizers. These borders are artificial borders imposed on us by colonizers. Why do you want to behave like you are owning colonizers' properties? These borders are colonizers' properties, they are not ours. Let us go back to African unity. We want one voice, one Africa. We must stop doing away with African hate, which was...
Even after 40 years in power, Libya's Colonel Gaddafi has some bold ambitions. His ideas for African unity involve the creation of a United States of Africa. As thousands of Africans continue to head north in search of a better life in Europe, he also has strong views on immigration. The Libyan leader is attending the G8 summit in Rome. Before leaving for Italy, he spoke to Euronews from Tripoli. Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, welcome to Euronews. Let's speak about the recent African Union summit. The main theme was the question of poverty in Africa. You're going to Italy for the G8 summit, and it's the first time that an African and Arab leader has taken part in such an event. What message would you like to deliver to world leaders?
Firstly, this summit is not the first. There have been others too that have attempted to mark Africa's presence. Several declarations and recommendations concerning the African continent have come out of previous G8 summits, but unfortunately they were only declarations. Personally, I don't expect this summit to be any different from previous ones. I hope it will be, but I don't believe it.
Allow me to speak of Italy. You went there recently, and you received a formal welcome from the Italian authorities, including the Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi. Can we say that a corner has been turned and that a new era of openness has begun between Libya and Italy?
Yes, I think so. And it's in both Italy and Libya's interests, as well as those of the Mediterranean basin, Europe, Africa, world peace and cooperation between states. We need to move on from this terrible past to open a new era of cooperation and friendship, to be able to apologize for what happened and compensate people who suffered from the colonial era. And that's what's happened. There've been apologies and compensation has been agreed upon. We can't do better than that.
But we noticed from your visit to Italy that you had attached to your lapel the photo of Omar al-Mokhtar, the Libyan national who was executed by Italian colonial authorities. That gesture was perceived as provocative. What did you mean by such a move?
That's for people to interpret as they wish.
Movement of goods. Within the SADC and the SADC protocols, there ought to be free movement. And a country such as Namibia, with a population of no more than 3 million, if no more than 3 million at the very best, how can you realize your potential within intra-African trade? It is through SADC. Namibia can identify her niche, and within SADC, immediately you have 60 million South Africans, immediately you have the Angolan population, you have a market of 100 million. And how do you achieve that? To remove tariff and non-tariff barriers. How do you achieve that? To ensure that there is free movement of labor. How do you achieve that? To ensure that we produce items that can be sold here. You are selling beef to Europe, and the Europeans will ensure that before you sell your beef, they want to know when that cow was born. We now have birthdays for cows. They want to know the anniversaries when the cow was inoculated. In other words, from the cradle to the plate, they want to know the history of your cow. That cow could very well be sold to Malawi. I'm not saying you compromise standards, but I'm simply saying that you have a market here which is unexplored. I'm saying that there are many things that can be done. And if we can achieve intra-African trade even up to a level of 40%, then we would begin to have what one would call hard African currencies. Look at a country within your region such as Swaziland. And I said this before. In my own view, those who are in government should ask themselves, when they are negotiating with a country like China with a population of 1.2 billion, do you think that Swaziland can meaningfully enter into a bilateral relationship with China? It's a joke. It's a joke, with due respect. Why do I say it's a joke? Because you have a population of 1 million, the purchasing population is possibly not more than 1/3, you don't mean anything to China. But if you negotiate the bilateral within the context of SADC, then it begins to make sense. If you begin to negotiate the bilateral, if you are Benin in West Africa and you are negotiating with the European Union, negotiate the bilateral within ECOWAS, then you are protected by ECOWAS. But what happens is that the Chinese are very clever people. They'll always have two agreements. One is the Chinese version, which is the authentic version, and which sometimes has details that you don't have in the English version. So that when it comes to interpretation, they go back to the Chinese version. And you lose 10 out of 10 times. I know the Chinese were building in Kenya one of the roads, and they have this thing. And you know the Chinese are clever. They come with the money, so you can't refuse. They come with the money, they say, they design, they say, oh, no, we design as we build. And when you are designing as you build it, you start with 20 billion, by the time you are finished it's 40 billion. In other words, we must recognize that which is in our best interest. Several years ago, in 1998, as a young student of the WTO rules, I was invited to a meeting in Grand-Bassam in Cote d'Ivoire by the office of the Prime Minister of Cote d'Ivoire. And what amazed me is that that meeting was a meeting of French-speaking West African countries guided by France on what position the France and the French-speaking countries were going to take at the high-level conference in Seattle in the United States of America. How? It means, therefore, and when you go there, you find the Japanese have a delegation of 200 people, with 10 of them in agricultural subsidy on tomatoes and onions and rice, and Africa has a delegation of 5. 3 of whom have no idea what WTO is. And we have a duty in our institutions of higher learning to also create a generation of Africans and Namibians who are not looking for employment, they are creating employment. And it can be done. Let us create employment. What are you doing? And I'm running myself, we are launching an African program where I'm telling young Africans, go home and create employment for 5 others. Go home so that when the government is talking, you are also contributing.